See what happened to a homeless orange seller who won a rich man's heart. The scorching afternoon sun blazed over the busy streets of Lagos. Leila, a young homeless girl, sat on the sidewalk across from a luxurious restaurant. Her frail hands outstretched as she begged for help.
Please help me.
Life had been unkind to her, forcing her to survive on the little she could gather from kind-hearted strangers. The aroma of rich, delicious meals from the restaurant filled the air, teasing her empty stomach as she watched people come and go, dressed in elegant clothes, laughing, and enjoying their meals without a care in the world. Leila sighed, wishing for a different life. One where she didn't have to sleep on cold streets or go to bed hungry. As she sat there, a commotion caught her attention. A well-dressed man, with neatly combed hair and a confident smile, knelt before a woman at the restaurant's entrance. In his hands, he held a small velvet box, which he opened to reveal a sparkling engagement ring. "Isabella," he said, his voice filled with nervous excitement. "Will you marry me?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlookers as they anticipated the woman's response. Isabella, a tall, elegant woman, adorned with expensive jewelry on her fingers and neck, looked down at the ring with a disgusted expression. The designer bag rested over her shoulder. "This," she scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is the ring you're using to propose to me? A cheap ring, David? Are you serious?" David's smile faltered. "Isabella, I love you. I worked hard to get this ring. It may not be expensive." He was cut off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "If you can't afford a ~1,000,000 ring, then you're not the kind of man I want to settle down with. I can't be with a broke man like you." The crowd gasped again. Whispers spread like wildfire as people shook their heads in shock at Isabella's reaction. David's face turned red with humiliation. His hands clenched into fists as Isabella spun on her heels and strutted away without looking back. Hurt and anger burned in his chest. And in a fit of frustration, he yanked the ring from its box and threw it across the street. The ring landed near Leila's feet. She gasped and quickly grabbed it before anyone else could. Realizing what had happened, she looked up and saw David walking toward his car, his head low with disappointment. Without thinking, she sprang to her feet and ran after him. "Sir! Sir, wait," she called out, clutching the ring tightly in her hand. David had already entered his car, but Leila reached him just in time and knocked on the window. He sighed and rolled it down, looking at her with tired eyes. "Your ring?" Leila asked, as she held it out. David shook his head. "Keep it. Sell it if you want. I bought it for 100,000 naira. Maybe it'll help you change your life." Leila hesitated, then shook her head. "No, sir. It's not about the money. I saw what happened back there, and you shouldn't give up on her if you love her. Give her some time. Don't give up just yet." David studied her for a moment, surprised by her words. Then, for the first time that day, he smiled slightly. "Thank you. I won't give up." Leila nodded, relieved he wasn't letting go so easily. "What's your name?" David asked. "I'm Leila," she replied. "I'm David." Reaching into his wallet, he handed her some money. "Here. Take this. Get yourself something to eat. Leila's eyes widened in gratitude. Thank you, sir. David gave her one last nod before driving off, leaving Leila standing there, clutching the money tightly in her hand. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe her life was about to change. The next morning, Leila woke to the familiar sounds of Lagos. Honking cars, distant chatter, and the occasional shout of street vendors selling their goods. She stretched and sat up on the old cardboard she had laid on the pavement the night before. The money David had given her was still tucked safely in her pocket. And for the first time in ages, she felt a sense of possibility. Instead of using the money to buy food that would last only a day, Leila had an idea. She would use it to start a small business. Having seen other homeless people struggle after spending money all at once, she wanted something different. After a short walk through the bustling market, she found a woman selling fresh oranges in bulk. With careful negotiation, Leila bought as many as she could afford, and carried them in a small basket she had found earlier. She then picked a busy junction, near a residential area, and set up her spot. At first, people barely noticed her. Some looked at her suspiciously, recognizing her as a beggar from the streets. But Leila refused to be discouraged. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, and spoke politely, offering the sweetest oranges in Lagos. Slowly, customers began to stop by. A kind elderly woman bought a few. Then a group of schoolchildren. And soon, Leila was making sales. By evening, she had sold almost all her oranges. For the first time in years, she had earned her own money. And the feeling was overwhelming. Just as she was packing up for the day, a familiar car pulled up near her spot. It was David. He stepped out of his car and walked toward her, smiling. Leila, he greeted. Leila beamed. Sir. David laughed. You don't have to call me sir. Just David is fine. How have you been? Eagerly, Leila replied. I'm doing well, thanks to you. I used the money you gave me to start this business. Instead of spending it all, now I sell oranges. David's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Really? That's amazing. He looked at her display of oranges and smiled with admiration. You're a smart woman, Leila. She blushed slightly. Thank you, David. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to change my life. David bought a few oranges and leaned against his car as they talked. Isabella came to my house today, he said with a sigh. Leila's expression turned serious. What did she say? She apologized, David said, shaking his head. She said she overreacted and wants me to forgive her. Leila watched him carefully. Did you forgive her? David nodded. I did. I still love her despite everything. That's good, Leila said. Love isn't about money or fancy things. If she truly loves you, she'll realize that. David chuckled. You always know the right thing to say. Leila shrugged. Life on the streets has taught me a lot. Taking a deep breath, David added. Anyway, I needed to clear my head, so I thought I'd stop by. Can I buy some oranges? Leila grinned. Of course, she said, quickly packing some for him. As David handed her the money, he suddenly noticed a bruise on her cheek. His eyes darkened. "Leila, what happened to your face?" She looked away. "It's nothing." "Leila," David said firmly. "Tell me the truth." She sighed. "Last night, some men attacked me while I was sleeping. They stole all the money I had saved." David's jaw tightened. "You mean to tell me you've been sleeping out here, with no protection?" Leila gave a small, sad nod. "I have no other choice." David ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "You can't keep living like this. You're coming with me." Leila's eyes widened. "What? You mean, I can stay at your place until you help me find somewhere safe? But what about Isabella? What if she finds me there?" David's expression hardened. "I'll handle it." Leila hesitated, but deep down, she knew she had no better option. With a grateful heart, she nodded. That night, as David drove her to his home, neither of them realized how much their lives were about to change. David's car came to a smooth stop in front of his home. A spacious, well-kept house, in a quiet, secure neighborhood. Leila hesitated as she stepped out, taking in the beautiful surroundings. She had never been inside a house this nice before. The soft glow of streetlights illuminated the garden, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. "Come in," David said, as he unlocked the door. Leila followed him inside, feeling out of place in the elegant, yet cozy living room. Comfortable sofas. A large TV. Neatly arranged furniture. It was nothing like the harsh streets she was used to. "You can stay in the guest room," David said, as he led her down a hallway. "Make yourself at home. Tomorrow, I'll help you find a place of your own." With gratitude shining in her eyes, Leila turned to him. "David, I don't know how to thank you." David smiled gently. "You don't have to. Just promise me one thing. Don't go back to the streets." "I promise," she replied. After a quick shower, Leila changed into one of David's oversized t-shirts he had lent her. As she lay on the soft bed, she realized that for the first time in years, she would be sleeping under a roof, on a mattress, instead of on cold concrete. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. The next afternoon, David decided to take Leila shopping for some clothes. "You can't keep wearing the same thing," he joked as they drove to a high-end boutique in town. Leila hesitated. "David, I don't want to waste your money." "You're not wasting it, consider it a fresh start," he reassured her. They arrived at the boutique, and as they stepped inside, Leila's eyes widened at the elegant dresses and shoes on display. A friendly saleswoman approached them, offering assistance. Just as they were about to start shopping, David's expression suddenly darkened. His body stiffened, and his jaw tightened as he focused on something or someone near the entrance. Leila followed his gaze, and felt her heart drop. Standing at the doorway, locked in a tight embrace, were none other than Isabella and David's boss, Mr. Sterling. Leila grabbed David's arm as he instinctively took a step forward. "David, wait," she said. His hands clenched into fists. His face a storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. "She told me she was traveling, that she wouldn't be available for the party." Layla watched as Isabella leaned in, whispering something to Mr. Sterling, before giving him a playful kiss on the cheek. David looked like he was ready to explode. "Let's just go back home," Layla urged gently. "Not here, not now." After a long pause, David took a deep breath and nodded, without another word. They turned and left the boutique, returning home. Later, David paced angrily across the living room, while Layla sat on the couch watching him. "You won't believe this," David finally said, running a hand through his hair. "My boss told me to bring Isabella to the company party tonight, and she told me she was traveling. Meanwhile, she's been with him." Layla sighed softly. "David, I know this is painful, but at least now, you know the truth." David clenched his jaw. "She was using me all along, Layla. She only wanted my money, and now I see why she rejected my proposal. She was never sincere to begin with." After a moment of silence, Layla asked, "So, are you still going to the party?" David scoffed. "And humiliate myself in front of everyone?" "Not if you come with me," Layla replied playfully. "Just buy me something nice, and leave the rest to me." For the first time that day, David laughed. He studied Layla for a moment, before nodding. "All right, let's give it a try." That evening, after getting new clothes, and having her hair done, Layla stepped out of the room looking breathtaking. The worn-out girl from the streets was gone. In her place stood a confident, stunning woman, in an elegant dress. David stared at her, speechless. "Wow, you look incredible." Layla smiled. "Let's go show them who the real fools are." Together they left for the party, unaware that the night would change everything. The grand ballroom of Mr. Sterling's mansion was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was an extravagant company party, attended by Lagos' finest business executives, employees, and their partners. David parked his car outside the lavish estate, and turned to Layla. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Still hesitant, Layla smiled confidently. "Trust me." David took a deep breath, then stepped out of the car. He walked around to Layla's side, and offered her his hand. She accepted it gracefully, and together they entered the grand party. As they walked in, heads turned. Layla looked stunning. Her new dress hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair was styled elegantly, and her radiant confidence made her almost unrecognizable. David himself looked sharp in his tailored suit, but all eyes were on the woman beside him. Whispers immediately spread. "Oh, is she that David's fiancée? Wow, she's beautiful." Layla held her head high, unfazed by the attention. Meanwhile, David scanned the room until his gaze landed on Mr. Sterling, who was seated in the VIP section, with Isabella by his side. Isabella, dressed in a shimmering gown, was laughing and sipping wine, as if she owned the place. Yet she hadn't noticed them. David tightened his grip on Layla's hand. "Ready?" Layla nodded. "Let's do this." They walked straight toward Mr. Sterling. As they approached Isabella, she suddenly looked up and froze. Her eyes widened in shock. "David," she stuttered before her gaze shifted to Layla. Her expression darkened with disbelief and jealousy. David smiled coolly. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling." Mr. Sterling, oblivious to the tension, smiled back. "Oh, David, you finally made it," he said, gesturing toward Isabella. "And I see you've brought—" "Yes. I brought my fiancé," David interrupted. Isabella's mouth fell open. "What?" David pulled Leila closer. "Meet Leila, the woman I'm going to marry." Gasps erupted among the guests, who had been eavesdropping, and were now openly staring, waiting to see what would happen next. Isabella stood up, her face red with embarrassment. "David, what is this nonsense? Who is this girl?" Leila remained calm and composed, while David chuckled bitterly. "Oh, now you're interested in who I'm with. That's funny, considering you told me you were on a trip, while you were actually here, with my boss." Mr. Sterling's smile faded as he turned to Isabella. "Wait, what is he talking about?" David continued. "Oh, you didn't know?" Isabella was still playing the role of my fiancé. "Just a few days ago, she was using me for my money, while secretly being with someone else." The room fell completely silent. Mr. Sterling's face darkened as he turned to Isabella. "Is this true?" Isabella swallowed hard, her confidence crumbling. I can explain." Mr. Sterling snapped. "No need. I don't tolerate liars. Leave now." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, as she realized she had lost everything. Turning back to David, her voice desperate, she pleaded. "David, please. I made a mistake." David held up a hand. "No, Isabella, the mistake was thinking I needed you." Then, with a genuine smile, he turned to Leila. "Because I found someone much better." At that moment, David did something unexpected. He dropped to one knee. Leila's breath caught in her throat as the entire room watched in stunned silence. David took a deep breath, then got down on one knee. "Leila," he said, holding up the same ring that Isabella had once rejected. "You came into my life when I was at my lowest. You reminded me of what truly matters. You've been strong, kind, and selfless, despite everything life has thrown at you. I don't care where you came from, all I care about is where we're going." He gazed into her eyes, his voice steady. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Leila's eyes. She had never dreamed of this moment, especially not in front of so many people. Taking a deep breath, she smiled. "Yes, David. I will marry you." Applause erupted throughout the room as David slipped the ring onto Leila's finger. Meanwhile, Isabella stormed out, her face burning with humiliation. Mr. Sterling sat in silence, his expression unreadable, processing everything. But for David and Leila, nothing else mattered that night. They had triumphed, not just over betrayal, but against the odds. The echoes of applause still rang in Leila's ears, as she and David left the event hand in hand. The night had been nothing short of magical. Isabella's downfall, Mr. Sterling's humiliation, and most importantly, David's heartfelt proposal. It was a moment Leila would never forget. As they drove back home, Leila stole a glance at David. He looked relaxed, a small smile playing on his lips as he focused on the road. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. David chuckled. "Happier than I've been in a long time." She glanced at him and added, "David, I still can't believe all of this is real. A few weeks ago, I was sleeping on the streets, begging for food, and now, I'm engaged to a man who truly cares about me." David reached over and squeezed her hand. "You deserve this, Layla. You deserve happiness." Layla smiled, though deep inside, a small voice whispered doubts. Was she really worthy of this new life? Could she truly leave her past behind? The next morning, Layla woke feeling uneasy. She wandered into the kitchen, where David was making breakfast. The smell of coffee and toast filled the air. "Good morning, fiancé," David teased as he handed her a cup of coffee. She smiled but hesitated before speaking. "David, are you sure about all of this?" David frowned. "What do you mean, Layla? Your family, your colleagues. What would they say when they find out you're marrying someone who was once homeless?" David sat down with his coffee and took her hands in his. "Layla, I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about us. The only opinions that matter are ours. You've worked hard to change your life. You're not that girl sitting on the streets anymore. You're strong, smart, and beautiful. And I love you." Layla's heart pounded at those words. No one had ever said that to her before, not like this. "I love you too," she whispered, finally allowing herself to believe in this happiness. Just as they were finishing breakfast, the doorbell rang. "I get it," David said as he headed to the door. Layla waited, sipping her coffee. Within seconds, raised voices could be heard. "You can't just show up here." Curious, Layla stood up and walked to the door. As she turned the corner, she froze. There stood Isabella, tear-streaked and looking desperate. Layla's stomach tightened. "What are you doing here?" David's voice was sharp. "Isabella." Clasping her hands together, her voice trembling, Isabella pleaded. "David, please, just hear me out." David crossed his arms. "I have nothing to say to you. Please, just go." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "I know I messed up. I was selfish, I was blind, and I hate you, but I've lost everything. Mr. Sterling kicked me out of his mansion." Isabella cried. To be continued. Did you know that oranges originated in Southeast Asia, particularly in regions of China and India, over 4,000 years ago? They were later introduced to Europe by Arab traders, and spread to the Americas by Spanish explorers, in the 15th century. The word orange comes from the Sanskrit word, noga, which passed through Persian and Arabic, before reaching European languages. Thanks for watching. Love. From the Classic Stories.